So is everybody about ready to go? Yes? No? You guys ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Stroke Committee meeting for GETAC. And we'll call the roll. I'm here. George. HT.
Yes, sir.
Lisa. Nope. Henry. Joanna. Deb. Yes. Warren. Yep. Lawrence. Yes. Paulina. And Timothy.
Here.
Okay. So I want to thank thank everybody for being here for this rainy day, far north, close to the North Pole for some of you, but it's nice and warm, so I like being here. I like the ducky weather. I think everybody really appreciates your service to this committee and to GETAC, so thank you very much. I want to recognize new members. We have new appointments this year. George Cravens is reappointed. Salvador Cruz Flores is a new appointee. And Lisa Hutchinson is reappointed. So those are our new appointments, and I'm reappointed, by the way. Okay, so on to discussion items and action items. Is this from you, Jane? Number one. I'm happy to do this, but I don't know who it came from.
That actually came from the chair of GETAC.
Okay.
From, I believe it was August meeting. He asked each committee to come up with the accomplishments since the inception of the committee.
Okay, so our first discussion item is identify and list the accomplishments of this committee since its inception and report back to GETAC. And offhand, I could say we developed the rules and transport plans, and that we've done revisions on them. Are there other things that you guys can think of that this committee's done while you've been here? Lame ducks all. Okay, I'll try to work on a list. I mean, it's a long list, but small. Next up is Ebola virus disease recommendations provided from the CDC and lessons learned related to healthcare worker exposure and the treatment and transport of exposed patients. Do we have someone to present that?
That is a placeholder in case the committee wanted to discuss the Ebola incidents. We felt like that given the amount of activity that we had in the state in that discussion a few weeks ago, that it would be prudent to have it on the agenda, so should you decide to discuss it, you could.
Do any of the committee members wish to discuss Ebola and its relationship to stroke? There may be a CEO that had a stroke with regards to Ebola. I'm unaware of a direct correlation, so we'll pass on that. Next is an update from the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke, and I'm happy to do that. At the last council meeting, we continued to work on our legislative report. The Texas Council is required to report to the legislature on heart disease and stroke in the state and make recommendations on how to fix that. You're going to see a little bit later in our program the preliminary data that the council has collected with all your all's help, and then the recommendations that follow from the council basically are in three areas: prevention of stroke, acute care and remediation. The things that the council are going to be recommending to the legislature in regards to prevention are the Million Hearts Initiative. Next is the Self-Measured Blood Pressure Initiative, Stroke Public Education, and that's through the Stroke Consortium. In regards to acute care, which we have data that acute care can make money within the biennium, the money that we put in there. We're recommending to continue and enhance the data collection that's being done right now. We're recommending that we're recommending $2 million go to the regional advisory councils to further develop their heart disease and stroke transport plans. We're recommending development of a 12-lead grant program, transmission program, and equipment program, again for EMS. We're recommending $2 million in that regards. And this has been helped by the Cardiac Care Committee. Lone Star Stroke Program, we're recommending continuing to fund their ongoing instrumentation that they put in place. And then in regards to chronic care, some of you guys may not know DARS and DADS. They're already large organizations in place to help people in remediation. But one of the gaps that we found is in speech remediation. And Austin Speech Labs is a great model for this. They've had outstanding success in helping people to speak even 5-10 years after they've had a stroke, when before most people thought that 9 months to a year was about the most people would get back, but they've had much better success. And so the council is going to be recommending a statewide speech remediation, which is a current gap right now that's not available. So that is the report from the council. Are there any questions about that? It's not a finalized recommendation yet. We're still polishing it up, but we'll have it by the end of the year. Some of it has to do with the data that you're going to see in a few minutes. Okay, so no questions on that. Next is an update on the Lone Star Stroke Consortium, because we don't have anyone here to talk on that. Lone Star Stroke submitted an annual report to the Texas Council September 15th. Basically, they were allocated $4.5 million from Rider 97 to do stroke research in the state. They have currently 3 programs that they're doing. The first program is VTOP, which is a video self-management to prevent stroke for rural Texans. The overall objective of that was to determine the feasibility of providing video teleconferencing, delivery of patient self-management education, and stroke risk factor management to rural Texas residents. So that's one research project they have ongoing. The next research project that they're doing is called NAS Care, which is Nurse-Driven Acute Stroke Care. It is hypothesized that a NAS Care educational platform and a standardized stroke code protocol based on core principles inspired by a quote, pit stop, end of quote, care model can improve metrics in telestroke cases. So that's their second. Their third project is working on a phase 3 study where in emergency rooms, in addition to TPA being given, ultrasound is being used to try to augment this. This is called the Clotbuster ER trial. This is actually a for-profit trial by Servast. They're trying to develop a commercial product. A fourth study under development is being designed to evaluate barriers for the use of telemedicine in stroke. And so that's their report and what they've done to date. Are there any questions about Lone Star Stroke? No. Okay. Next up is report on progress of Regional Advisory Council RAC Stroke ST segment elevation myocardial STEMI data collection funded by Appropriations Act Rider 97 of the 83rd Texas Legislature. Can you hit the deal? Okay. So this is the data we've gotten so far, and this is very preliminary data. It's 6 months data, but we were trying to collect this data as quickly as possible to have it for the legislative session. Thank you to all the RACs that have helped to do this. We should say thanks to the Department of State Health Services, epidemiologists, and everyone who put this together for us. Unfortunately, the DSH people can't be here, so they gave the deck to me, and I'll try to show you what we've got. In regards to stroke, all 22 RACs were asked to submit data for 13 elements, 4 pre-hospital stroke, 6 hospital stroke treatments and admissions, and 3 pre-hospital STEMI. The object of the data collection survey was to gain an understanding and prevalence of ST, elevated myocardial infarction, and stroke in Texas, and evaluate pre-hospital components of the system care and treatment of stroke in patients. So basically, from a RAC perspective, different from a hospital perspective, the RAC perspective actually looks at all of Texas, the suburban and frontier areas. It's a very unique data set that no one else has. The RACs were asked to report on this data for the first and second quarters of 2014. SurveyMonkey was the link provided to the RACs. This was to try to make it the least burdensome possible to the RACs. And inclusion-exclusion criteria were provided. The limitations on this data to avoid data duplication, the RACs were asked not to report data from the hospitals that were participating with Get With The Guidelines stroke program. That's because that data is also going to be analyzed in a separate component of this. And it should be noted that the RACs are dependent on the hospitals and the EMS providers' participation to get this data. So that also may affect the data. So this map is the current state of the state. You can see the little red dots. There are 9 comprehensive stroke centers. The blue dots are primary stroke centers, and there are 109 of those. And green dots are support stroke facilities, level 3. And so this is a generalized distribution through the state. And you can see there's basically an axis right in the center. And there's a lot in P, San Antonio, O, Austin, Q, Houston, and E, Dallas. So I'll let that go up there a minute so everybody can sort of see where their RAC is and where their certified facilities are. The thing that we had them do is make this RAC-centric to show where the RACs are in regards to the centers. So here are the first numbers. The map on your left is the number of stroke runs per RAC. So you can see that on this, the places where the most EMS stroke reported runs are in O, P, and Q in the center. And that there's less reported stroke runs in other portions. And you can see that somewhat in the eastern part of the state and the northern part of the state here and some other areas. You can look at your own RAC. Now, it's interesting, we tried to look at this in several different ways to try to get better numbers, to do runs versus, one of the ideas was to do the number of runs versus the incidence of disease. But as you can see on the right map here is the 2012 age-adjusted hospital discharge rate due to stroke. This was done on a county-by-county basis and then thrown into the racks. And so this is the number of patients that are discharged from hospital in the counties they're in that have had strokes. And so that's the basic look at sort of the incidence of stroke, or one way to look at the incidence of stroke disease in the state. But it's 2012, it's trailing data. And so to get more real-time data, obviously we need more money to get real-time data. But if you look at the two, what we really are trying to do is to do a gap analysis. Where do we need more resources? Where can the state legislature apply funds to RACs, to EMS, to help? And from this map, it's North and East Texas, although obviously everybody needs more resources. So this is the closest we could get to a gap analysis right now. It'd be nicer if we had 2014 data, we could then epidemiologically make it even better and could then do stroke runs per disease incidence. But the epidemiologists just cringe to do that with 2-year-old data. So does anybody have questions about this? Do you like these maps? Mark?
Mark Alberts from UT Southwestern. So very interesting data. You know, I think one hypothesis, Dr. Rutledge and others, is to consider that maybe those folks in that eastern gap, either the ambulance is not calling them stroke runs, or a significant percentage are not using the ambulance to get to the emergency room. And in fact, during our site visit for the Joint Commission, they looked at our number of stroke patients and EMS runs and found that fully 50% of our patients were not accessing our ED via EMS. They were driving in, walking in, being wheeled in, or something. So I think that's another hypothesis to consider, because clearly, as many of you know, all the studies show that if you don't access stroke care via EMS, there's a huge delay in your treatment. So I just put that out as an alternative hypothesis to consider.
Yeah, and we brought this up, and part of the reason it's not addressed is because we want to encourage the use of EMS for the stroke runs, because they don't, you go to the wrong hospital, you don't get the TPA, it doesn't work. So, and realize the RACs are incredibly generous with their time. They're getting just a couple of $1,000s to do this. So it's very nice of the RACs to even do it. Yes, sir.
Vallabh Janardhan from Texas Stroke Institute here in North Texas. Really outstanding preliminary work over here, Dr. Rutledge and Dr. Cravens and team. The question I have is, we actually did an analysis in our institute for several years with more than 4,000 patients in the mode of arrival to the facilities, and a significant number of facilities are not accessible to certified stroke centers through land, and so we use a lot of air ambulance, and so want to just make sure that when we have the stroke runs that they're reflective of land and air ambulance, because a lot of regions in East Texas and West Texas do have a need to approach the comprehensive stroke centers while air ambulance. So just want to bring to the attention of the committee if that can be noted on modes of arrival.
I actually don't know. Does anyone know on their monkey survey, did they ask about air? I don't know. It's a good point. I mean, I think it's part of what we want is to know secondary transfers. Some of this, the Get With The Guidelines data, the hospital data that's coming is the next round, is going to have some of that where people are coming from other hospitals to their hospital. So I think that'll be in some of the follow-up data.
No.
Say again? Right. Okay. So did you hear? So their RAC did. These are great. Other thoughts or comments about this? I mean, I think this is pretty interesting. This is the first time any gap data has been shown that I know of.
The other thing I would add, along with the excellent comments by Dr. Janardhan, is it relates to the drip and ship also, whether we're capturing the drip and ship patients, since it is hospital-to-hospital transfer. So I think that would be important to know, especially with Texas being very rural, very large, and with stroke systems of care evolving, and as we'll hear about in a few minutes, the acute stroke-ready hospitals, it is going to be important to capture that drip and ship, because a lot of the interventional cases are going to be drip and ship cases.
Right, I think that's going to be the follow-up data from the hospital data. This is, as I'm reminded by people talking, I think this is the RAC. You know, this is from a RAC perspective rather than a hospital perspective. And we'll have this other data, which I'll tell you more about. But let me show you some more slides.
Are you all going to come back with a correlation between the guidelines and this data as well?
Yes, because the RACs were asked not to report on hospitals that were already reporting, so not to do duplicate work. So this is the very first, most preliminary data from that's been reported back to the council by. So the council basically has an agreement with the Department of State Health Services to provide data back to the council. So this is the very first data we've gotten back, and realize, I mean, this is, you know, this is reported by the RACs for the first 2 quarters. So this is very, very first look, and it may not be complete. Every RAC may not have had a chance to completely do this, and as it evolves, it's going to get better and better. But this is like the first time we're measuring the pulse on the person, and it's just a couple of quarters. Yeah. Ever. And Mark, does anybody else do this anywhere else in the United States?
Yeah, yes, the answer is yes. There are some states that collect data in some sub-regions. In Chicago, we had data from the Chicago Area Stroke Task Force. And there are other states and other programs that collect this.
Okay. But we'll be the biggest state that collects it. Okay, so they were also, this is the number of stroke runs between 2 and 7 hours. So this is the idea is to give people an idea of how many runs are, I guess, depending if you're a primary or comprehensive stroke, they're going to be lights and sirens for either one. But the under 2 hours would be, the idea would be that's acute IV TPA, and the 2 to 7 hours might be endovascular and or TPA. And so this is the percentage of stroke runs less than 2 hours for each 2 hours, and between 2 and 7 hours for each RAC. Interesting data, look. Let's see, what else? Is anybody interested in heart disease at all? You want to see the heart as well? Yeah. So I'll just run through this quickly, just because it's, in many ways, it's the same disease, STEMI and stroke. It's just a different organ. These are the PCI-capable hospitals in the state, and we'll be showing this to the Cardiovascular Care Committee tomorrow. Similar runs, these are their STEMI runs, short T elevation, the acute myocardial infarctions. And again, there's a similar but slightly different pattern of the RAC runs for acute STEMIs. And then also, if you look at the discharge data, the 2012 hospital discharge data per county, it's a slightly different distribution. You know, we have that more eastern Texas, eastern and northern Texas stroke, but it sort of moves a little bit further. It's more diffuse throughout the state, so it's a slightly different look at similar diseases. These are their percentage ST runs where they have 12 leads. What 12 leads does is it allows people to know that it's a STEMI, to know that there's a need to go to a PCI center, and then you want to be able to transmit it and alert those hospitals to get the fastest recannulation time. These are the STEMI runs, less than 30 minutes. And those are the preliminary results that we have, and 3 cheers to DSHS. They did a good job for the council. So you all, I don't know where I have that. So just the council's continuing to further refine these. The council has requested, and we'll hear in just a minute about recommendations from this committee to the council, and then the cardiovascular disease committee to the council. The council's also asked key individuals in the state to help in further improving the data requests. Dr. Alberts has kindly agreed to help on that. So there's going to be further refinement in this data, and if you guys have ideas of how we can do better, the council would like that, because within the conditions that there's very small amount of money to do this with, we want to do more. And so please, if you have additional thoughts, you can contact me or other people on the council or DISH directly. Okay, next up, unfortunately this is becoming a one-man show. As update on data security and governance regarding RAC STEMI data collection addressed by the 2013 Appropriations Act. There was some offline concern at the last GETAC meeting about the security of the data that's being collected in this program, and hopefully by seeing the data here that you will be somewhat reassured that no hospital, no EMS was pointed out. This data is intended to be help with gap analysis, not to look at any specific hospital or group, but to help people. And one of the concerns was that because this data is being reviewed by the chronic care component of the DSHS, that it could somehow find its way to the regulatory portion of DSHS, or that it could be sold out the back door, or who knows what could happen with this data. So that was offline. We took that back to the council when we heard this, and we formed a special committee to review that. And basically that committee ended up sort of petering out because there's almost no risk. All this data is collected via a contract, with individual hospitals and with the RACs. Within that contract, security is maintained. The number of people that have access to this data through the council at DISH is 3 or 4 people. There's no way that that data can go from one part of the DISH to the other part, to rules or other or regulatory components. The data is secured within their computer system. Their computer system is basically a tier 2 system, so it's extremely well protected. The epidemiologists, the people that have access to the data, they're under contract, they're working for the state, they can't sell it through the back door. So from every angle that we can look at it, and I want to reassure people, this data is secure, and you need not worry about it. And if you do need to worry about it, you should fix your program. But it's not going to come from the dish or the council. Hopefully you'll do it yourself. So does anyone have questions about the security of this data or concerns about it? Because we've really tried to address it on every single angle we can to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. Okay, you can always speak later. Okay, next is number 7 is consider recommendations of the Brain Attack Coalition of Standards for Stroke Ready Hospitals and Acceptance Certification of Level 3 Support Stroke Facilities. So we presented this at the last GETAC council meeting, and so it's up for ratification this time. And so this is just here as a placeholder to see if there's any additional discussion or considerations on accepting the BAC standards for a way of determining certifications for our level 3 support stroke facilities. Dr. Alberts.
Just some information for the council to consider. So the Brain Attack Coalition standards have been adopted by the Joint Commission to move forward with a formal certification program, and that is going to be rolled out at the International Stroke Conference in February of 2015 with a plan to formally launch it with field certification personnel in June or July of 2015. As far as field testing, the BAC recommendations, they've added a few little bells and whistles and tweaks here, one of which is actually your next agenda item, which is about EMS education. And I think what the Joint Commission has settled on is 2 hours of EMS education for the acute stroke ready hospitals. There was a little dance about that because the acute stroke ready hospitals are obviously small with very limited resources. So it's not that they have to do that, but it's going to be language along the lines that they will facilitate or promote a minimum of 2 hours of EMS education because, again, of a lack of resources. And the other, two other somewhat vexing issues that I think the various committees have solved is, number one, the requirement that an acute stroke ready hospital has some quote-unquote agreement with sort of a big brother, a PSC or CSC. And after talking to legal folks, they said that's not going to fly because of antitrust considerations. So the final language is going to be that there be a protocol in place so that when a very sick patient comes to an ASRH, that the ASRH has some quote-unquote relationship with a bigger brother hospital, PSC or CSC, so that at 3 in the morning, they know who to call. And they have some protocol worked out for who they're going to transport, how they're going to transport, how the billing works. All those logistical things will be set. So we had to move away from the agreement, but there's going to be some established protocol. That was point number one. The second point, which came up as field testing, and I'm not sure it's solved, but I'm just going to share it with the group, is whether the ASRH can admit stroke patients. And that led to a whole lot of discussion. And I think the final language that was proposed, I can't promise you it was ratified, but I think there was acceptance, was that there's not going to be an overall rule that says the ASRH can or cannot admit all patients or some patients. It's going to be more like they can make judgments on a case-to-case basis based on local protocols, national standards, but they need to track who they admit and who they don't admit. We didn't want to say that they have to send everybody to a PSC or CSC, but we didn't want to say that they shouldn't send anybody. You know, it has to be a happy medium. So it should reflect national standards, care protocols, and guidelines, and they need to track this. So that's where it ends up as far as I know.
That's an excellent update. People have questions? Don't go yet. One of the concerns I've always had is if you're a rural hospital, You know, you're running things on a shoestring to begin with. If you had to transfer all the stroke patients and stuff, you know, it's a financial burden, and then some of the strokes can be taken care of. So I'm really glad to hear, you know, that in regards to that. And then TTAF has set, you know, outstanding, has done outstanding work on their certification program. And the basis of this is to just, because there are going to be many other certification programs, Joint Commission, DNV, and others, and so we have to have, this council needs some basis to judge all of them. And I want to, and I don't know if you guys know, Dr. Alberts is sentinel in forming the Brain Attack Coalition and all the work. I mean, he's done an incredible amount of work over the years, and part of the reason the Brain Attack Coalition exists is because of you, so thank you.
Well, you know, thank you for those kind words. I think the strength of the BAC is the fact that it represents all of the major groups involved in stroke care: neurology, neurosurgery, EMS, neuroradiology, AHA, NSA, Joint Commission, CDC, and the like. So thank you for those kind words.
Are there any other questions? I mean, we've got him here on the spot. Any other questions about? It should. I mean, this should pass at the next. It's the council meeting Monday night. I'm hoping. I haven't heard any negatives about it. So, this is our last chance at discussion before it goes on.
I think for a state of Texas, where we have so many rural facilities and a lot significant percentages of our population live in small cities, this is meant to really guide EMS and patients about which hospitals in those vast rural areas that didn't have dots on them on Dr. Rutledge's map, you know, need EMS coverage and hospitals designated as acute stroke rating hospitals, so that our patients and EMS knows that among this group, there are certain hospitals that do strive and achieve a higher level of acute stroke care. That's really the concept here. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great, thanks. Next up, number 8, consider stroke education program work group recommendation of 4 hours of stroke-related continuing education be required for recertifying EMS personnel. So to remind you guys, at the last session, we moved this on to the council. The council had some concerns that this wasn't completely fleshed out, and I wanted to bring it back for discussion. I found that Mark's comments that the BAC is going to require 2 hours to be interesting, but HT, do you have some thoughts that you wanted to?
I will make a valiant effort to get some of those questions answered for the council, and I think, yes, in view of all of the direction that we're headed, that we are headed the right way, and this is good. And I will follow up with some of these other recommendations and make sure that we are following the direction that they're headed already, and support that.
And you've talked with the education committee. Can you tell people about that?
Well, yes, I spoke with the committee chair, and he's hiding in the back, just briefly about this stuff, and there did not seem to be any problems with it as far as the need for it and the direction and so forth we're going. And so I feel very good that we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, and maybe you can help us by fleshing out some programs to make it easier for the medical directors and education people, so that it's just sort of a cookbook that they could open up.
Yes, I will try to do this.
Okay, any questions or thoughts? Yes.
So, you know, I just got back from an international meeting, a SVIN meeting in Miami, and I just want to bring to the attention of this committee, I'm sure Dr. Rutledge and Dr. Cravens are aware of it, but I wanted to bring to the attention of this committee that there are close to 5 international stroke trials that have either been completed or put on hold in favor of endovascular stroke therapy, similar to some of the early trials in the 1994-95 for heart attack care. We're seeing a similar trend in brain attack care, And as we're talking about education for EMS medical directors, and the RACs in all of our regions, I think the first of these publications are going to start rolling out from December 18th onwards over the next 3 to 6 months. Is there something that we should think out as a committee over here to make sure that we keep the EMS medical directors and EMS personnel aware of such cutting-edge data in favor of revascularization with catheter-based therapies for large vessel occlusion similar to STEMI, so that, I was seeing that other graph where majority of the stroke runs were less than 2 hours, and there was a significant lower number for the 2 to 7 hours. And with some of these trials like ESCAPE in Calgary going up to 12 hours, just wanted your thoughts on how we can promote that education to our EMS colleagues.
Do you want to talk about the Netherlands trial too, for people?
So there were 5 trials. I'll start off with the MR rescue trial. This was a trial of around 500 patients that was done in the Netherlands, around 18 or 19 sites, and they looked at, in the 0 to 6 hour window, the randomized to endovascular therapy, which included intraarterial thrombolysis and latest endovascular therapies, around 97% of them being stent retrievers that were used. And this trial was completed and presented in Istanbul in Turkey in October 22nd to 25th, just less than a month ago, wherein the outcomes of 90-day Rankins in the treated arm had a significant positive impact. I think it's around 10% or more, which was predefined efficacy criteria. So that trial is going to be published soon. As a consequence of that, ESCAPE, which is another endovascular trial looking at CAT scans and aspect scores, which are looking at that in Calgary, Canada, up to 12 hours of stroke onset, including wake-up strokes, had an interim analysis which was significantly in favor of endovascular therapy. Extend IA has been held in Australia, another catheter-based trial that has been in favor, and the results are going to be published. And then SWIFT Prime and Therapy, 2 trials using a stent retriever and thromboaspiration systems. The data safety boards have halted them because of the data that's come out. And so this is going to be pretty groundbreaking in the field of stroke care, and we just need to make sure that the results of clinical trials don't take 17 years to translate to hospitals and patients, and we as a progressive committee over here think out aloud and be proactive about how to educate our EMS medical directors and EMS personnel so they are empowered with the right information to provide the best cutting-edge care for our patients.
Yeah, thank you. And the thing I would add is, in our shop, the stent retrievers, we don't hardly use them anymore because they're slow. We've gone completely to aspiration, and we routinely get times under 15 minutes for Tiki 3, and actually we've now have one time under 10 minutes for Tiki 3. So basically, the sooner you open up blood vessels, the better. But what's interesting about our state, or what I would like to remind everybody about our state, the stroke care in our state is based on FDA-approved devices, not on these clinical trials. And so we are already mandated to treat within the window of the FDA-approved devices, which is 8 hours. That's why we have comprehensive stroke centers. That's why we have these bypass plans. So I think this reinforces the things that the state's already doing, and I think it's a great idea to remind medical directors, EMS, that this is working. But our state does this. I mean, this is what we're supposed to be doing right now. So thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay. So next up, George is going to tell us about specifically, I guess it works in right timely, doesn't it, in regards to considerations for transport bypass plans. You want to go ahead? Here.
We've actually looked at about half of the RAC systems that are in place, so we still have some work to do there. And Dr. Rutledge and I were talking about this. There's a lot of variation throughout the state and sort of some of the hospital protocols and in this, not hospital, but the RAC protocols. And looking primarily at the NIH severity scores as a piece to add to that and make a recommendation in that way. But I think there still needs to be some more research on that. Again, I'd like to look at the rest of the RAC systems that they have in place. And also I think there needs to be more discussion about that with the committee. Any questions?
Sorry, I'll keep this as the last comment, but you know, Dr. Cravens, thanks for your leadership. I know you've done a lot here in North Texas on working with EMS and pre-hospital triaging. It's absolutely important for us to be able to have some way of triaging people. We don't have an EKG in the field for EMS to triage to comprehensive or primary stroke centers. I think we have one ambulance with a CAT scan in Texas now, but it's not financially feasible to have it in every corner of our state. So it begs the question how best to triage these patients to a comprehensive stroke center versus a primary stroke center, so we don't overfill the comprehensives that are 9 and underfill the 109 state certified primary stroke centers. There's obviously shortened NIH scales are there. The LA pre-hospital motor score has been used. The Cincinnati has been used from a diagnostic standpoint, not so much on the severity standpoint. And in Georgia, they've started using just a simple concept of if a patient has hemiplegia, they go to a comprehensive stroke center compared to those that have partial deficits to make it even easier on triaging. But the big question I have for the committee to think about is, and the audience, is as we have approved therapies and effective therapies for opening up blood vessels, and EMS with all their due diligence and their communities bring patients to a local facility, sometimes it takes up to 4 hours to work those patients up in that local facility before they decide whether therapy is even available there or they can do something. Is there an opportunity for us to learn from heart attack care wherein within patients are taken to their nearest facility to get care, but in half an hour, if they're not a TPA candidate and they're still within the time window or some kind of pre-hospital stroke severity criteria used, that they're then taken to a comprehensive stroke center, so we don't get these 48-hour later calls that there's a large vessel occlusion in the brain, and the smaller hospitals are holding on to patients, maybe because of lack of education, lack of resources, or lack of imaging in a rapid way to triage whether there's large vessel occlusions. Any thoughts from this committee on how we can overcome that problem so the treatment rates can increase?
I think that's part of what we were looking at to try to gather some data on this. I certainly would welcome anybody that wants to be involved on this transport, the bypass work group. It's kind of multi-tiered in what goes into play. It is educational. There's politics involved. There's lots of issues. But I think if we can kind of go through what is already in place and then standardize that somewhat, which is the goal, obviously. But I think there's a few things that we can certainly, I don't know the right word is upgrade, but bring up to the current level and then take that out and do educational work with that. But I certainly would welcome any help on that.
If I could just build on that excellent comment, Evan Allen did some work in Florida around the, I think, Tampa area where he did this field triage, and he did a control group and an intervention group, and he found it was very effective to get a certain select group of patients to a comprehensive stroke center more rapidly. So I think field triage is certainly one way to go, and I agree with the comments. You don't want patients languishing. But the other thing I wanted to share with the group that I brought up at the SVIN meeting, I don't know how many of you were there, is we're focused a lot on getting the patient to the comprehensive stroke center, which obviously we think that's a good idea. But the flip side of that, especially for some patients in some centers, is get the interventionalist out to the patient. Just think about that for a minute. It sort of changes the paradigm a little bit, but it's certainly easier and safer to move one interventionalist with EMS, with an ambulance, out to a facility. And the beauty of that approach, hasn't been tested yet, it's a hypothesis, is that a lot of these outside hospitals can do basic angiography. We know around the country, thousands of hospitals can do basic angiography. So while the endovascular expert is being transported from the CSE out to Our Lady of Holy Causes Hospital, let the patient stay there and let them start the angiogram. Let them do the imaging, get the groin prepped, get a catheter out there, figure out diagnostically what's going on, and then that way you're not wasting time. And then the endovascular person shows up and he or she is ready to go with a stentriever, aspiration, whatever it is. And the beauty of that is that you have some synergy. You're not wasting the time doing nothing while the patient is being transported. You're at least engaging in a diagnostic and therapeutic paradigm. Then once they do the intervention, assuming it all goes well, if the patient has a miraculous recovery, maybe they can stay there. If not, they can come into the CSC with the ICU and the stroke unit and neurointensivist and all those things. So I just brought it up for comment at the SVIN. A lot of people came up to me afterwards and said, that's a really neat concept. Maybe we need to explore that. Obviously, it's not going to apply to all patients at all hospitals, but for those intermediate facilities that can do some stuff that aren't too far away, maybe it's an option. So I just wanted to share that with the group, and especially with the EMS comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jody Harbert, GETAC Council Member and Education Chair. Happy to hear this. This is something that's probably been coming on for quite a while. This is like a diamond. It's a multifaceted problem to try to figure out how we're going to do this. But let's go back and take a little history jaunt here. We were able to develop level 1, 2, 3, and 4 trauma centers with a lot of work and a lot of criteria. We've been able to develop cardiac care to do the same thing. It's going to take a while for EMS because it's going to be not only training, but someone mentioned politics earlier, leaving your city uncovered, trying to find a way to make sure that we get these patients to the appropriate care. One of the things that our committee is looking at right now is looking at how we can help develop what's called advanced practice paramedic or advanced community medic. And I think this might be just another stopgap to say, what can these people do in that area? And I think he made a very good point. Sometimes we try to get the patient to one spot where maybe we have to get everything we need to the patient first. So we will probably, with my committee's acquiescence, we will put this on the agenda for a work group meeting in January and see what we can help and develop it. That would be okay with you all, Dr. Rutledge.
What addition? So from our standpoint, by the stroke legislation that came down 5 years ago, it's required that EMS personnel have stroke education, and what wasn't defined was what education it was. But previously we made recommendations about, I think, using Think Fast and using the ACLS protocol. But there weren't time requirements, and there wasn't really anything to really help you guys help, programmatically. There certainly places like Missouri has a really excellent online training program, and there are other places. What things can we specifically help you with? What things do you need from us that we could help facilitate you?
I think the first thing we're going to have to do is look and make some definitions so that they are universal. what are we looking at? And we say, you know, primary stroke center for EMS might mean something different for a basic versus an advanced system. We're going to have to look at availability. One of the things that the education in Texas has done as far as CE is we've tried to keep it as fairly flexible as we possibly could, so that you need X number of cardiac hours. We didn't say it has to be ACLS, because it's going to be driven by that particular department's medical director. So if that medical director says, no, we're not going to use ACLS, we're going to use what I want you to use, that's what you do. What does that do? It creates a whole different cloud of different types of education around. All of them very, very good. So I think when we have the additional CE hours that are available, that I know that there have been certain people who say, boy, if we put stroke in one, next thing geriatrics is going to ask that we put one here, and then someone's going to ask for a different one here. We're trying to keep that open so that whether you're rural, whether you're frontier, whether you're urban, whatever resources you have available, you put those forward. So I think in January we need to sit down and find out which ones are going to work best, whether it's something we do online, to be able to say we're going to designate an hour per certification level per 4-year period for that. We're probably not quite there yet. We're going to have to sit down and work through a lot of things to get to that point. But as far as acknowledging there needs to be some standardization among stroke education, I don't think you'll find many of us that will argue that.
Okay, but you do support the number of hours that we're recommending, or do you want to work on, you need more work on that?
We're going to need to work on that a little bit more. I think before we recommend an hour, one thing we don't want it to be is arbitrary. We want it to have some substance, so that if it is an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, as an educator, I will tell you it's not necessarily the hours sometimes as the objectives. I think we need some clear objectives so that if, you know, HT can go over and do this in 45 minutes versus Deb can do it in an hour and a half, that's fine, as long as the objectives are met. So I think for us it's going to be more objective than it would be just an hour requirement.
Okay, so can I, Homer, can you work with him and come back with, as you're writing quickly?
Yes.
And do you want me to, so in regards to going to the council meeting, you guys want me to just report that this is in progress?
Certainly, you can put it in progress, and with the group's permission, tomorrow morning we'll just see if they're okay, and if so, we'll add that to our January work group meeting.
Thanks.
You bet.
Thank you very much. And I certainly wouldn't be abashed if we developed our own as well. Put a little Texas spin on it. Number 10, update from the Hospital Database Surveillance Subcommittee. Joanne is not here. Warren, can you update us on this? Warren's not here. Oh, Warren's not here? Oh, can you get? Yeah. Oh, excellent. I'm sorry, I didn't. Your name's here too.
No problem. Yeah, we had a phone conference, Warren and Johanna and I, on Friday to identify some of the data elements that we wanted to put forward. We did identify 10 or 11 elements that we might be able to collect. We wanted to keep it smaller, considering a lot of the area, or some of the hospitals are not using Get With The Guidelines. That would have been the ideal to be able to pull that information, but since we don't have that, and in order to, some of the people or hospitals don't have a stroke coordinator, or maybe a stroke coordinator in several roles, so we didn't want to add a lot of burden. So we did come up with 10 data elements just to bring forward. Do you want me to go through what we identified?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, so these are not in any particular order, but the ones that we came up with that we thought might be important to review was, first of all, the mode of arrival. So did they come by private vehicle or by ambulance? So we felt that that may be able to help us with the community education. Also the diagnosis, TPA within 3 to 4.5 hours, a number of, or percentage of patients or number of patients, door to needle times, the complication rate, and define that so that the patients that get TPA, if they have a petechial hemorrhage, you know, that's not really a complication rate. So we want to make sure that we have that information defined as far as what the complication rate, or what a complication we would want to be reported. Mortality rate, the discharge disposition of the patients, the TPA rate, so the overall TPA rate, number of ischemic strokes, and the number of patients who actually get TPA. And then IV TPA outside hospitals, so the drip and ship patients, the number, percentage of those, and then the number of endovascular cases, and were they medication or mechanical, medication and percent mechanical. So those were the data elements that we have initially identified.
I think those are great, and I'm happy to take these to the council to move forward on this, but at the same time, I think this is a great forum to get discussion on these data points. What do you guys think about these data points as giving us good information about stroke care in the state?
Can you just refer them again, please?
Sure. The arrival mode, so private vehicle versus ambulance, diagnosis, TPA within 3 to 4.5 hours, door to needle time, complication rate, mortality, discharge disposition, TPA rate, initial NIH stroke scale. I don't think I said that one. Sorry. And then the drip and ship patients, and then the number of endovascular cases, medication, percent medication and percent mechanical. That's it.
Please.
Pardon?
Sure. So these are recommendations to the council, just like the consultants making recommendations to the council. These are like data elements that we already have in place. So this is a solicitation for data elements for us to do the additional work on. So we can certainly post it online. That would be great. And then, but if we post it online, what we want is suggestions on what might be better data elements, but also keep in mind we're saddling the racks with, we're saddling people with collecting this data without, much money to do it with and stuff. And so we have to be careful. I mean, it would be wonderful to get, I would love to have, finite, granular data on all these things, but we can't overburden people too. Saying that, what's your thought?
One thing to overcome that, Dr. Rutledge, is the Texas Hospital Association has discharge data on ischemic and hemorrhagic strokes from every acute care facility. So rather than burdening to try to reinvent the wheel on that data, that's readily available, and I'm sure at a GETAC level that can be obtained, and it's constantly updated and shared. And the only reason I bring that up is treatment rates with TPA, drip and ship, and endovascular ischemic revascularization is only relevant when we know how many truly are there. If there are 100 ischemic stroke patients, is that hospital treating 7 people or 27 people? And that's a big difference for EMS to know, and I think that will drive treatment rates in a big way. And we don't have to collect that hospital discharge data that's readily available.
Actually, we do. And if you remember the graphs that I put up, that's trailing data. It's 2 years old. And so for us to actually do current real-time gap analysis that's epidemiologically sound, that's more like a real-time pulse, you have to sort of get that data. Otherwise, we're only going to have data that's 2 years old, which would be pretty trailing edge.
My understanding is that
filtered, yes.
My understanding is that you can get that data for up to 2 quarters before, but we can certainly discuss offline.
Yeah, so currently the DSH hasn't been able to do that. So at least that's what they told me.
Because market share data is available to hospitals. They contribute in real time with ischemic and hemorrhagic, and that's available up to 1 quarter before. So maybe something for us to tap into.
Yeah. Part of the trap with that becomes, as he said, the data from the hospitals is somewhat dated. And, on the other side is the EMS people who have pretty much the information, but they don't necessarily have the resources to gather all of that to get that in so we can look at it in a timely way. So that's the disconnect in a way. And obviously it's the EMS side that plays such a major role in this, and to try to gather that data. I mean, that's still a challenge. So, okay.
Maybe I missed something in the whole conversation, and those are all excellent data points, but what does the group want to accomplish? What is the hypothesis? Because as far as I know, most, if not all, of those data points are collected and get with the guidelines. And that's updated quarterly, is my understanding. I mean, I can pull data from my hospital and see what we did each quarter. So I don't think that that's really dated, but maybe I'm missing something in this whole conversation.
That's a very urban perspective.
It's a very what?
Urban perspective.
Yes.
You know, when I mean, get with the guidelines. You know, once you move to suburban, rural, and frontier, you know, there is not get with the guidelines. I mean, you're thinking, you know, the stroke hospitals that are already out there. And if you remember our map, when we go out to the periphery, there isn't. And so that's why, yes, we have incredibly good data from Get With The Guidelines, but it's an urban perspective. What the RACs provide us with is a statewide perspective that you don't get any other way. There's not a good way to get at that data.
So what we did in Illinois, which even though people think Illinois is just Chicago and all the rest of it is just, you know, written off, is we had similar issues. And what we did is that we were able, through various state means, to Get With The Guidelines in those smaller hospitals. So give them that tool, so we didn't have to reinvent that wheel and then plug them into the system. And I mean, it requires some work, but at least you're not starting from zero, and it's easy to train people to do Get With The Guidelines. It's out there, it's a very user-friendly database, and I agree with Dr. Rutledge, we have to be very comprehensive in including that. But I just put that forward as a suggestion, and you don't have to use the whole Get With The Guidelines. You can just use Part A module or Part B module. Because you're right, they're not going to be doing endovascular stuff out there. You just maybe want basic demographics, time of presentation, do they get TPA? And you can adapt Get With The Guidelines to do that very easily.
So I'm very much in favor of Get With The Guidelines. It is a wonderful commercial product that's out there. But one of the things that we're rejoined from is imposing a commercial product, in role of small hospitals and stuff. What we can do is make recommendation on the elements, but when it comes to the actual commercial product, that's not something that we can do. It might be something that a hospital or a rural area finds, would be a good way to do it. But to impose that on them to use a commercial product is a bit problematic.
Let me suggest this to the committee. So since it started with the American Heart Association, and since they're based in Dallas, which is part of Texas, maybe they could help us develop something that's non-commercial, or maybe they would give us something that was non-commercial. I know, but God forbid.
I like that. We have American Heart people here. Will you give us for free?
I don't know if that's true, but since Dr. Warner, who's the CEO of UT Southwestern Hospital, he's on the board of directors for American Heart Association. I'm just thinking it might just be easier if we can parlay that into some friendly accommodation, since we have tremendous experience and data points on millions of patients with that. I agree with Dr. Rutledge, it can't be a commercial entity, but maybe there's a way of parlaying it, maybe.
Yeah, it would be, I think everybody's amenable to that. Do you want to?
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, it's almost just, as Dr. Rutledge said, it's taking the data or the information, the elements, and just not calling it, that. But at the same time, I think the difficulty becomes is how do we help the different RACs collect that and put that together and then be able to use it? And there's not something in place that I'm aware of to fund that, to collect and do all that data. So if the American Heart Association would like to support that, I think that would be a lovely gesture.
I'm sure we can work with our heart brothers and sisters and push this ball upstream.
Please.
Dr. Moore from Tyler. I just wondered if we could help doctors define the terms absolute and relative contraindications. I had a stroke this summer, and despite a prolonged seizure and having been on platelet inhibitors, I got TPA and it worked great. So that would be one point on the data. Would that be worth studying to see if we could see those people who did get TPA despite what were defined as either absolute or relative contraindications? What did we learn from that? And I'm walking because of it. Thank you.
And so I have an endovascular question. Other than me, we have at least one other endovascular guy in the room. Do you think it makes a difference at the number of endovascular cases? Do you think breaking it down into fibrinolysis versus mechanical makes any difference, or should we just combine that as one element? Combine it, two combines. I would recommend just combine that into one element. I don't need to think, because oftentimes, it's sort of like asking a plumber if he uses Drano and the snake, or, it's sort of, the plumber comes and goes, and that's it. Did you have a comment?
Yes. Hi, I'm Jennifer Gardner. I'm the Clinical Informatics Manager from the North Central Texas RAC and DFW area. So I manage all of the data collection for the RAC CVD project, and I wouldn't be able to do it without, of course, my hospitals and EMS. Some of the issues that we're seeing, though, is that, first of all, we're not on national standards. We're not on a NMSIS data set completely required and mandated by the state. Also, the documentation that's occurring in the field is not actually collecting along the national standards data set, all right? So a lot of these people are not even collecting these stroke and these STEMIs. They're occurring, but they're not documenting it. I think it's been recommended for years to have some sort of SPI, System Performance Improvement Committee. I know in my region, I began a Lean Informatics Committee in January, and that is to discuss these types of things, how we can drive the vendors to make sure that we have the run forms and the necessary tools that we need to make sure we're documenting those easily in the field. I know that STRAC has had paramount, just great success in the last 10 years because they have these types of committees where they discuss this with both pre-hospital and hospital to make sure they're looking at apples to apples. So my recommendation and hope is that we can have some type of committee that drives that kind of education and discussion at the state level. I think it's very needed in this time to really hit the core at the point of incident. And that's how we're going to get better data across the state. Thank you.
And I don't want to speak for Deb, but I think she'd be more than happy to have you help with her committee.
Good. The sooner we can get to NMSIS 2, the sooner we can get to NMSIS 3. And my hope and dream is that we do that by January of 2016 when data is mandated to the state. That's very hopeful and thinking, but I know that we'll capture a lot of these data elements that we need. But if we're not documenting in the field, that work is irrelevant. So I will help in any way I can. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
I know in our RAC in El Paso, we actually use a lot of these data points on a monthly report at our meetings. And one other line item that we include is if it was called out in the field, the code brain to the hospital itself. And if the team was activated, it leads into the EMS education.
Okay, so we'll add that to that as a recommendation for you to chew on.
I think one of the things that we discussed when we were on our conference was there may be some issues trying to identify the patients who are stroke alerts but end up not being a stroke, because in Get With the Guidelines, we only enter information by the discharge code. So that was the one concern, is how are we going to be able, or is there a way that we can capture that information? Because that's an important part of it.
It's a huge part of it. You're absolutely right. I mean, national data show that 50% of stroke codes in the field are not even strokes. So you run the risk of collecting huge amounts of data on patients who aren't even on target. And the other thing, as you all know, even with all these great educational programs, the half-life of an EMS technician in the field is what, 6 months? And then they move on? They have a very short half-life, which means you have to keep on re-educating them. So it is a vexing issue using field diagnostic data, because you're going to collect a lot of essentially irrelevant data.
Hi, Wanda Helgeson from El Paso. One of the things that we've instituted is on a monthly basis, our EMS services provide a list to each hospital of the code stroke patients, the code brain patients that have been delivered to them. The hospitals then compare that list with patients that actually had a stroke to provide feedback, and then the hospitals compare the patients that came in by EMS that had a stroke that were not on that list. So we're trying to capture those that were overactivated and underactivated as well.
Any other comments for the database surveillance subcommittee, DSS?
I actually have one more comment.
Yeah.
Something that we talked about, and I don't know if there's anything we can do about it, but we were talking about the difficulty in identifying the EMS patients with the hospital patients. And mirroring those two up, and talked about different things. You know, I don't know if we can look statewide, if there's something that we could do. For example, I know in our RAC we talked about getting a bracelet, having a bracelet applied to the patient with a number on it, and then that number could be recorded in the medical record. But you know, just some kind of a solution like that that would make it easier to identify those patients. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, the difference between a database and a registry. Registry is when you follow a person from place to place. Registry is not always a good word in these parts. But I think your idea is excellent.
One thing you might consider, and we've done that, is we require the medics to all get the cell phone number of the closest relative, because many times the patient is not able to help us. And if you could compare those, you know, in the record, it might be worth it. But if they bring the cell phone number, when you're making those tough decisions about TPA, you can call at least somebody.
Well, we got 13 minutes. Go ahead, Mark.
Just very quickly, so the other thing we did to try to address that and this continuity of care, but it's hard to do, is to get the run sheets, the actual run sheets from EMS, and then match them up with your hospital records. Because they're all going to have different unique identifiers. You just have to do it by their name. But we were able to do it after a trial. Statewide, it's going to be huge, because they all have their own companies, they all have their own communications, they're all going to be different run sheets. So it's a vexing issue.
So I'm going to, in the time remaining, I'm going to move on to public comments. I want to solicit everyone's, but I was asked to bring up a couple ahead of time. One of them was a question about there are more and more dock-in-a-boxes or detached ERs that are not part of a hospital. And the question was posed, does EMS have to stop or transport patients to ERs that are not part of a hospital? And so I've asked Jane if she could answer that for us.
No.
Can you elaborate? But I like the definitive answer.
Well, the
certification process.
Well, for the dock in the box, as you call them.
Standalone emergency
freestanding
rooms.
EDs.
Freestanding.
A freestanding ED. The freestanding EDs are licensed at. They have their own particular license. So the designations, all of our designations, we only designate hospitals, whether it's trauma, whether it's stroke, whether it's neonatal, whatever. We only do hospitals.
and saying that, they then necessarily wouldn't fall on a transport plan. So the question does anyone feel like they should fall within transport plans for stroke?
So the Joint Commission has been approached with this question, and my understanding is that they said no, a freestanding ED would not qualify as an acute stroke-ready hospital because they're not hospitals. So if the state rules that EMS needs to take patients to a hospital, a freestanding ED by definition is not a hospital.
That is correct. By definition, it is not a freestanding. They're not a freestanding hospital. There is that category in Texas, a emergency hospital. That's kind of a different animal, but I still don't think they would qualify as a stroke center.
A freestanding ED would not be a critical access hospital.
Correct.
Because it's not a hospital.
Correct.
I guess I need to ask the question another level up, not just the doc-in-the-box places, but the small boutique hospitals that are designated as hospitals that do have EDs, but they have no stroke or treatment capabilities. Do we have any guidelines or recommendations regarding those?
Okay, this is really getting into discussion and deliberation of an item that's not on the agenda. Okay. We really are kind of exceeding what we can do on just public comment. But some of that is going to be based on the medical practice and the judgment of the EMS medical director. But I don't know. I think it would be difficult from a medical practice perspective to take a patient to an ED that you knew was not prepared to receive it, to provide definitive treatment to that patient. That's a medical practice issue.
Right, and also our transport plans, that these are certified, that the transport plan is to certify designated hospitals, and then using a RAC-centric approach that the medical directors would have input. So it's an interesting question that yes, it wasn't proposed. So let me go to another quick one because so the question that came up was primary comprehensive stroke centers, at times they may not be able to completely fulfill their requirements. If so, they're supposed to designate, they're supposed to tell the EMS, the RAC, and the Department of State Health Services. I was asked, could you comment on uptime requirement? Are there uptime requirements for stroke centers? And should that be something we discuss in general? And the question's for you again, Jane.
Okay, I'm going to make it brief just because of the same thing on the last item. From time to time, any designated facility may be in a circumstance where they cannot meet all of the requirements for their level of designation. When they cannot, there's language in the rules that says that they must notify us and tell us when they're going to, what time frame that this, whatever the requirement is that they cannot meet will be, what's the expected time frame that they can get it corrected. That is the requirement in the rule as it is now. As long as they do that, they have met the rule. Now, when it comes up for their recertification, the certifying body will probably identify that and recognize it. And it really goes back to what their requirements are going to be as to whether they continue their certification or not.
Thanks. Anybody else have questions about that? Okay, so I fulfilled my 2 questions that I was asked to do. Is there other public comments? Yes, ma'am.
Bissell with SETRAC, and I just wanted to make everybody aware, kind of little save the date. April 30th, May 1st, we're going to be having a stroke conference in Houston. The reason why I thought it was important to announce it today is because we're going to have 2 tracks. One of them is emergency neurological life support, which is ENLS. The best way for me to describe that is ENLS is to stroke, what ACLS is to cardiac. It's kind of some new education that's going out, but that's going to be one of the tracks we have. Then the other one is we're partnering with the American Heart Association, and we're going to be bringing the stroke coordinator education to the conference as well. This is relevant information for any coordinator that's over a stroke program in a facility. So just wanted to make you aware, more information to come, but mark your calendars for the end of April and early May.
But, so it's, do you have exact dates?
April 30th, May 1st. So it's a good way to kick off National Stroke Month.
Okay, and it's SATRAC Stroke Conference.
We'll have it in Houston. It'll be Rice University. We're going to have at the Bioscience Research Collaborative building, which is kind of in the Texas Medical Center. It's where the STEMI conference was this year. So we know a few details. We're just ironing out the rest of it, but.
Excellent.
All right, thanks. CEs, American Heart Association is doing CEs for the stroke coordinator part, and then SETRAC will be doing, actually through the emergency, the ENLS, they're going to help us with the CEs. Okay. Anything else?
CME also, or just CEs?
That, I don't have that information yet, but I'll have more.
Okay, great. Other public comment or announcements?
Super fast, Cherie Boxberger, American Heart Association. Just wanted to clarify one thing for the record to make sure when we're talking about the data that's going into this DSHS project, that is a limited data set and there's no PHI in there. So as we talk about, you know, the security of the data, I want to remind the committee that there's no PHI there. And also, to those in the audience, there is still time. I'm working closely with DSHS, that if the hospitals who have not joined us yet to be a part of the data collection can still do that over the next few months. Thank you.
And I have a small correction. It's the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease, not the Department of State Health Services that does the data.
It's the designator. And
right, it's the designator.
Yes. Thank you for that correction, Dr.
Yeah, but we do, the more people that are involved, the better. Other public comments or announcements? Going once, going twice. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.